History on the line in the 305. Notre Dame is 0-6 in Miami, losing their last 6 games, I should say, averaging 16.7 points per game, allowing 21.8. All of this will come to a head on Sunday. We've got a massive weekend of college football. I'm telling you, if you want to know why the joy is down in the heart of Caroline Fenton and myself, Jason Fitz on Yahoo Sports Daily, it's because this weekend is loaded. Like, it is loaded with college football destination games that you're just going to sit down and say, you know what? I'm going to order pizza from like the 18th place this weekend. I will take the wings, a side of ranch, and blue cheese just because I want variety, and I'm just going to eat all of it. Caroline, one of these games Sunday is this ranked on ranked matchup. We get number 6 versus number 10. Notre Dame is currently 6 at Miami, number 10. A lot of question marks for both of these teams. So the question I ask you is, who you got in this game? Why?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that. Well, when you're
That's
doing
part of the show.
kind of the quarter, yeah, I know. When you look at the quarterback comparisons, it's pretty crazy when we make these comparisons, right? It's Carson Beck, who just 1 year ago we were talking about as a potential first overall pick, and now we're wondering, like, does Carson Beck stink or not? To the phones. So I think we're obviously talking about a career renaissance in a way for Carson Beck as he transfers from Georgia to Miami, and then CJ Carr at Notre Dame as a redshirt freshman who's taking on his first start in college football, and he's just trying to have fun out there. So the quarterbacks, I think, are wildly different, and I would say overwhelming advantage from what we know right now to Miami in the quarterback situation. But I think roster-wise, overwhelming advantage to Notre Dame. Like, Miami's defense was absolutely horrific, dreadful, and like rude. Almost, it was so bad. It was like it was rude to the game of football. How much more can a defense be overhauled in just one offseason? So for that reason, I am going to take Notre Dame. I do not think it is going to be a very pretty game. I think that Notre Dame wants to keep it very low scoring. I think Miami wants to come out of the gates and score early to force CJ Carr, this young quarterback, to have to throw the ball around the yard. But ultimately, defense wins championships. I came up with that. You can trademark that. And I have to take Notre Dame's defense and their run game, and Jeremiah Love, who was a massive part of what Notre Dame did last season. He comes back. I think that he's even more so a bigger part of this offense with a young quarterback getting acclimated into this team and into this offense. So I take Notre Dame because I trust their defense so much more than I trust Miami's, not just Miami's defense, but more than I trust Carson Beck.
Yeah, this is all about Carson Beck. And if we're being honest, look, I was talking to a couple of people that follow the Notre Dame program closely, trying to get a sense because Notre Dame has a new defensive coordinator. So what does that mean? Well, it means a couple of things. Schematically, it's going to be different this year. And so they expect a lot of different coverages out of the back end of the defense, which is important. 3/5 of that secondary returns from last year, and they added DB that played some at Alabama last year. So they've got plenty of talent in the secondary, and you're mixing up coverages that are hard to prepare for. So now I've got a quarterback that I don't trust at all, that I think is just flat out inaccurate, right? And then all of a sudden, drop balls were
Are you
part of
talking
it
about
last year.
Carson Beck?
Yeah.
Let's be
It's
fair here, though. Let's be fair. How many incompletions that Carson Beck threw last year were his fault when they had a receiving core that led all of college football in drops?
Yeah, it was a historic number of drops for a receiving core.
Yeah.
How much of that is the wide receiver? How much of that is Carson Beck putting in a wide receiver in a situation where he might get murdered coming over the middle, too? So, I think some of that flies in the face of Carson Beck. Carson Beck's fine, but he's not a great defense beater to me. So you've got a defense in Miami that I don't trust against a defense that is going to be game planned in a way that I don't think Carson Beck can properly prepare for. I actually think Notre Dame rolls in this game. I know people keep telling me it's going to be close, and I hear you. I think it is kind of low scoring, but I could see this being the sort of game that Notre Dame wins 20-7. I think they win by at least a touchdown, and I think that the ugliness of turnovers is the thing that really captures everybody. Now, Notre Dame has a new quarterback of their own, right? So that's obviously, and how much do we trust the Carr? All of the Carr analogies. That's a real question, though, here when you've got a kid coming in at quarterback with a lot of expectations. And, we've got to look at the fact that there's so much on the line for Notre Dame in this. As you and I have talked about before, when you talk about the college football playoff, man, Notre Dame needs to get a win here because they don't have a lot on their schedule that gives them runway moving forward, right? Like, they don't have a lot of ways to change whatever the popular perception becomes from this outcome. So I think there's actually a ton of pressure on Notre Dame, who I think can make the college football playoff, to turn around and win this football game.
But also, neither does Miami. Like Notre Dame, I think doesn't get enough credit for how difficult their upcoming schedule is. I mean, not only do they have Miami in week 1, but they also turn around and host Texas A&M in week 3. They also go to Arkansas, which I know Arkansas isn't necessarily world beaters, but that's still on the road at an SEC team. Notre Dame also hosts Boise State. Now, Boise State was a playoff team last year. Without Ashton Genty, can Boise State kind of recreate the magic that was last year? We will see, but still, right now, they're a top 25 team coming off of a playoff run. I mean, USC, I don't think USC is going to be anything great, but USC is still, I mean, a legitimate program. We'll see what Lincoln Riley can do in year 4, but I think Notre Dame has a harder schedule than Miami has. Yes, Miami opens the season, obviously, as we're talking about with Notre Dame. They host Florida. But other than that, they avoid Clemson in the ACC. They avoid North Carolina in the ACC. We'll see what that Bill Belichick experiment looks like. But they get Louisville, solid team, not a top 25 preseason team. They get Stanford, which I don't know how successful this one-year Frank Reich experiment is truly going to be. They go to Virginia Tech. They have South Florida. I like Alex Golish a lot, their head coach at South Florida. But overall, all of the entirety of these two schedules, I think Notre Dame does have more opportunities to prove themselves as a college football playoff team more than Miami has. I think Miami has Florida, and that's their big opportunity to prove that they can be big time contenders.
Yeah, I just don't believe I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't believe Miami is going to be in the college football playoff discussion. I think that this is I don't trust Carson Beck, and I still don't trust this defense. I think Miami is going to be an okay football team that finishes the season on the brink of the top 25, but not anywhere near the top 10, right? So to me, the college football playoff, I'm already eliminating Miami. I think, like you mentioned that Florida matchup, I like Florida a lot more this year than I like Miami. So before anyone makes that an SEC bias, I just think Florida's better built right now. So Florida, I think, takes down Miami. Notre Dame takes down Miami. Now, all of a sudden, you're asking for the ACC to be sort of the reason that they build themselves back up, and I don't see that there. The problem for Notre Dame, to your point, is that they don't have a schedule, in my mind, that gives them enough runway to go out and get a bunch of signature wins. They don't have a chance to turn around and get like these huge moments. But Miami, at Miami, opening week of the season, will still carry gravitas with the committee, even if the team itself – even if Miami turns out to not be great. And one thing we have to acknowledge is the committee still matters to Notre Dame, right? Like there is a process where if you win the ACC, it doesn't matter. If you win the Big 12, it doesn't matter. If you're Notre Dame, you still got to finish, high enough to get into this college football conversation. So I do believe that there's a better path to Notre Dame to get into the playoffs because I think they'll be in contention. But weirdly, I don't think that their schedule will if they get beat 35-3 by Miami, I don't think they get the runway to make up for that.
And it is important to understand because I think that there is this false narrative that individual games are diluted or not as important in a 12-team college football playoff. It's important to remember, if we look back at last year, there was only one team in the 12-team college football playoff that lost week 1 that got into the dance, and that was Clemson, who lost to Georgia week 1. Now, I do understand some of those teams that were in the college football playoff, some of them played cupcakes week 1. So take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But when we have meetings of the powers this week, Texas and Ohio State and LSU and Clemson, in this game, Notre Dame, Miami, maybe in a different light, Alabama, Florida State, that it's important to acknowledge that individual weeks matter, that these games matter. Week 1, even though the college football playoff feels so far away, these games have massive college football playoff implications. It's not everything. There's still plenty of opportunity to dig yourself out of an 0-1 hole. But if history, at least it's a one-year history, tells us anything, week 1 matters.
Which is why I'm so torn, Caroline. Like, if we're being honest, I want these matchups week 1. I do. But there is no preseason in college football. So all of a sudden, the teams that choose to schedule somebody, you end up in this situation where you're scheduling a massive opponent week 1. You're scheduling a big brand. You've got this rivalry moment, like all of these things that are great for the sport. But if you lose it, it does set you back a step. And there are other teams that are simply going to open with, whatever, the Central Connecticut, right? And by opening with the biggest cupcake they possibly can, they essentially get a preseason game. There's got to be some line here where we reward teams for taking a chance in week one. And I don't know the fair and equitable, as we always say, fair is where a pig gets a ribbon. But, like, at some point, college football teams are going to stop scheduling games like LSU Clemson. They're going to stop scheduling Miami Notre Dame if the risk doesn't make it worth the return. And that's real. Like, if I ran a college football program right now, there is not a chance in hell I would schedule a week one opponent that was worth anything. I would schedule the biggest cupcake I can and just put my guys on the field and let them knock off the rust, let them hit somebody else, and let them get better. And I would schedule better, tougher games as the season went on, because I don't know that there's a great reward for whoever loses this game, considering the sacrifice that they put in playing a real opponent. I don't know that the reward makes it worth it.
And that's my frustration with the current college football playoff model and how it's selected. And there's going to be no perfect way to do it, because when you're dealing with 132 teams that all have vastly different strengths of schedules, how are you supposed to standardize that? You can't. But that's what I fear, is these matchups. Like, we are talking about these games. This is the best week one in the history of college football. For the first time ever, we have a preseason number 1 versus a preseason number 2. These games are what we fall in love with. These are the kind of early season matchups that make this sport so wonderful. So if you are constantly digging yourself out of a hole throughout the remainder of the season because you're trying to get back what you lost in week 1 because you played Ohio State or you played Alabama or you played Notre Dame, so on and so forth, why would you do it anymore? Like, the SEC is expanding to a 9-game conference schedule. You're going to have 3, more than likely, 3 permanent opponents. Well, if I'm a fan of an SEC team, I want my permanent opponents to be Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky. Or, whatever, teams are at the bottom of the conference. Because what's the point of playing Georgia, Alabama, and Texas every year if that just makes your path so much harder? And if what matters on your resume is how few games you lose, make the path as easy as possible. I hate that, Fitz. I hate it, because I love these LSU Clemsons, these Notre Dame Miamis. I want matchups between the heavyweights. I am so sick of Alabama playing St. Mary's School of the Blind whenever they have the opportunity to. But I don't blame them. I don't blame them for scheduling those kinds of games in the slightest.
Look no further than Dublin, where we saw Iowa State and Kansas State play an important game that mattered for the college football playoff, and it was sloppy, and it was ugly, and it was everything you don't want.
And it was beautiful.
But it was perfect. But also, we would have watched it if it was the School of the Blind versus Central Connecticut. Like, we would have watched it. So burn the games early, and then give us the good after that.